Hello Crafties, welcome to the second part of this knit along. My name is Infiniti and I am the head crafty behind this channel. In case you didn't know, in case you're new, go ahead and subscribe, so you don't miss out on future projects like this one. If you followed along with the first one, cool, welcome back. Thank you for tuning back in. So a few, I guess, starter things. I'm at 38 rows, which is pretty close to 40. So between the cutscenes, I'm going to finish up those last 2 rows and we can go about finishing the project. I am using Lion Brand's Landscape in Bazaar. If you're following along with the gauge, any landscape yarn from Lion Brand will work for this. I am using 8mm wooden knitting needles, and I will post links to all of my supplies I've used so far in my description below, so feel free to check that out. So I've been doing some measuring along the way, a little bit of math. So if you've come this far, you might have noticed using my gauge that one skein was not enough for these 40 rows. So 1 skein of Lion Brand's Landscape with these 8mm knitting needles, you can get across 21 1/4 of a row. So, or how would I say that? 21 1/4 rows? Close enough? Okay, so that being said, you're going to need 2 of your skeins, and like I said, I have either 6 or 7. Let me see, 1, 2, 3, 6. We'll worry about it later. So, yeah, you should have enough with that. I would think I would have enough with that, but if not, again, we'll settle this before it's actually needed. If you also notice that when you knit your rows, 2 of your rows at a time are the same color, so I use that to kind of help me count my rows. I'm going to go over how to count your rows with this stockinette pattern, because if you're a beginner knitter, you're going to mess that up really bad, like really bad. So without further ado, I guess I can go ahead and get started. I'm pretty sure those were all the notes that I had. I'm pretty sure. So yeah, I think so. The ultimate goal, I guess, here is to make a square, because these shrugs are made from a pattern with squares, or a big square piece of fabric, and you fold it and sew it, and they're really easy. So because I have 29 inches from elbow to elbow, I want to have 29 inches going vertically. So to do that, I'm going to need like 100+ rows, and so by doing this in 40 row increments is really helpful. Also coming up, today is August 10th, so next week I know I'm going to be swamped, so I'm not promising you guys part 3 next week, because I got a birthday coming up. I work literally all week and it's just going to be kind of crazy. So I will probably get back around to part 3, not this upcoming Tuesday, but the Tuesday after next. So about, let me check the date, about the 20th of August. That is tentative, so do not hold me to it, please. Like I said, next week's going to be kind of busy. I will be knitting my little fingers off, don't worry. But yeah, so I just wanted to give you guys that heads up before we get started. Now, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead, pan down, and we can get started with the whole thing. Alright crafties, so like I said, I am going to show you guys first and foremost how to count your knitting stockinette rows. This is 40 rows. So if you are a super beginner and all you've ever done is garter stitch, or maybe you've never done anything at all, this is your first project, garter stitch is like the super basic first stitch that you learn when you knit, and those stitches are counted. Let's flip it on the back. You see these bars? Let me zoom in for you all. These bars. Each one of these bars, an easy way to count these garter stitches is that each one of these bars is like 2 rows. So if you can't see these things to like count them out. That's a really easy way. You could also stretch them out and get something with a point. I have a Tunisian hook right here. I know how to not snag my stitches. So if you pull them apart, you can see the rows in between, but it's really just easier to count the rows by 2. So stockinette is a little bit different. If you watched one of my previous channel chats, I did make garter stitch comparable to a single crochet and the stockinette stitch comparable to a half double crochet. But that's if you learned how to crochet first. If you're just knitting and on your knitting journey, that's cool too. I want to zoom out just enough for you guys to see these 40 rows. They kind of exceed my space. So I think continuing and going forward, this knit along will be on my floor spot. But anyway, so when you cast on, you can see down here where you might have these little kind of twisted, bumpy, almost V shapes down here, as you would with crochet. And let's zoom in just a wee bit more. You have these. This is your cast on row. And so this first set right here of, I call them Suzy Q's, if you don't know. That's your first row. You never count the cast on row, because even if you notice in patterns, the patterns for knitting will tell you to cast on and then do so many rows, etc., etc. If you bought any of my knitting patterns, I don't know if I have any out yet. I think I'm still in the process of writing my knitting patterns. Never mind. But I write them that way as well. So I'm going to zoom out some more yet again. And I want you to start counting. You don't, again, count that cast on row, but you count the next one. And so I have 1, 2, you're counting the V's, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, and then you might have to uncurl it a bit, but this one that you just got off of your knitting needles is number 40. So for the stockinette stitch, essentially you are counting the V's. So as I mentioned earlier in another video, it's really easy to count these rows, with the exception of this first row after the cast on. It's really easy. So before I get into, well, now that I've covered counting rows, I want to get into measuring. I had a stitch marker along my 28th row. My camera cut out on me. I moved it to my 40th row just so later on I can know I can start from this row and count my rows, and I don't have to start all the way back at the first row for counting, because that would be kind of annoying. Next, I want to get into measurements. So, you know, gonna get my handy little tape measure again. It's a gifted to me, and I do like this one better than most of the modern tape measures, because the modern ones are kind of exaggerated. So anyway, I'm starting my piece at 1 inch, at the 1 inch mark, and I don't know if I can zoom out anymore. Oh yes, I can. So I am, what is that? Okay. I am zooming out, and when I look at my work, I am up to the 11 inch mark. Let me zoom in. Let's zoom in for that. I am right there at 11 inches. So on my little note, my little sticky note, I'm going to make sure that I write that 40 rows is equal to 11 inches. And these are the kinds of notes that I like to make when I am doing a project or, you know, creating a pattern. I like to know gauge. It's so important, especially if you're making a pattern for like extra large or, you know, something like that. You're going to want to know the exact measurements that you need. So at 29 inches across and 40 rows up, we have 11 inches. And as I mentioned at the start of the video, 40 rows, or rather one skein of this Lion brand landscape equals 21 1/4 rows, or 21.25 rows. Okay, so again, we want to make a piece of fabric that is as wide, as long as it is wide. So we want to kind of make a perfect square, more or less. I'm going to put my little ribbon tape measure to the side, and we're going to get into the knitting part. So, moving on to row 41. Isn't this exciting? Moving on to row 41, this will be a purling row. And like I said before, I always start off the row with a knit stitch or two, just to make sure I keep a certain type of edge. And I like to push the last stitches from the previous row all the way back around so that I don't get them confused while I'm looking at them. So now we're going to purl. And of course, when you purl your yarn, your working yarn needs to be in front of your stitches before you start working them. So I'm doing that, and I'm inserting my my needle from the front. And I'm just going to wrap the yarn around, pull up that loop, and slide it off my needle, just like that. And if you're ever lost on what you were doing the previous row, you'll know immediately, because if you flip it over, these first two stitches that I did, you can see the little purl bumps, because you keep knitting on one on top of another. But if I had messed up and I did a row of knitting on this side too, I would have this garter stitch looking edge. So you don't want to do that. But it's a good indicator. Like I said, there's this big blanket I'm working on, and I made that mistake. So this row is going to be nothing but purling all the way across, and I'll meet you guys back when I get to the end. Alright guys, so I finished my row of purling, and basically this whole cardigan is going to be nothing but stockinette stitch, like I said, because the skirt is completely stockinette stitch. So we're going to coordinate here with the stitches. And so, like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I know next week is going to be super busy. I don't anticipate uploading any part of the knit along next week. I'm going to give myself until August 20th to complete some stitches. I think I'm going to set a goal for doing an additional 60 stitches. So, 60 rows. So you guys should as well, what am I trying to say? You guys should cumulatively have 100 rows of stockinette. So in review, we have gone over how to count the rows. We measured out our piece of work that we had so far. We identified the rows that we were on, you know, the difference between doing the doing the knitting versus the purling. We've also gone a little bit over that yarn usage. So I just wanted to make sure we're just on track. So I will see you guys next time, and I look forward to seeing whatever it is